Hello friends, myself Taruna Bansal, Assistant Professor, Department of Geography, Jamia Millia Islamia. Today I'll be speaking on classification of cities, age and functions. The main objectives of this lecture are how do we classify cities, that is on the basis of age and also on the basis of functions. Secondly, we'll also be dealing with the functional classification done for Indian cities. Now I'll start with the introduction. I'll start that hamlets, villages, towns, cities, megacities, they are nothing but form of cultural landscape of the world, and they have been growing from one to other settlements. These settlements, be it new or old, have nearly 50% of the population residing in them. That is, here I mean by urban settlements. But what is the basis of difference between rural or urban settlements? Now, if we say rural settlements, in rural settlements basically people pursue agricultural activities, while in urban they are engaged in non-agricultural activities. This is a quantitative classification but leaves some qualitative aspects which scholars have tried to bridge through the concepts of rural-urban fringe, rural-urban continuum, urban corridors, etc. In fact, today it is more common to think in the form of continuum rather than watertight compartments clearly cut into two different types of settlements, that is rural or urban. But here we are dealing mainly with urban settlements. Now, before we start with urban settlements, we need to know what do we mean by urban, because before classification we should know what are we classifying. So, what do I mean by urban? Urban, to say, numerous attempts have been made to define an urban settlement or a place, and the most basic definition of an urban place was provided by OPCS Census 1981 and Key Statistics for Urban Areas 1984. According to them, urban areas are made up of permanent structures and the land on which they are situated, transportation corridors, that is roads, railways and canals, which have built up sites which are less than 60 meters apart, transportation features such as railway yards, motorway services and car parks, which are operational airfields and airports can be included, mineral workings and quarries, any area completely surrounded by built up sites. This definition is not very extensive to cover the variations which are found in urban cities across the world, as we find that varied bases have been used to define urban population. Sub-examples have been taken from the United Nations Demographic Yearbook 1988 and as well as in 1990, which cover all the continents. In India, we define urban places as towns with municipal corporation, municipal area committees or cantonment boards. These are also places which have population of more than 5,000, density of more than 400 persons per square kilometer, and where at least 75% of the male working population is engaged in non-agricultural activities. For Japan, cities are called shi and they should have inhabitants more than 50,000, with 60% of its more of the houses located in the main built up area and 60% or more population engaged in manufacturing, trade or other urban type of business. In Europe, we have definition from France where cities are called communes. These contain an agglomeration of more than 2,000 inhabitants living in contiguous houses of or more, with not more than 200 meters between these houses. When we talk of Netherlands, these are municipalities with a population of 2,000 or more inhabitants. In Africa, we take example from Botswana, where cities are agglomeration of 5,000 or more inhabitants and where 75% of the economic activity is of non-agricultural type. When talk of Ethiopia, these are urban places where dwellings are in number of more than 2000. Now coming to USA in North America, here the cities are those urban places where there are more than 2500 inhabitants in an urbanized area, while in Canada the number of inhabitants is around 1000 or more than 1000 with a population density of 400 or more per square kilometer. In the continent of South America, the example is taken from Argentina, where populated centers with 2000 or more inhabitants is considered a city, while in Peru, population centers with 100 or more dwellings are called cities. In Australia, population clusters of 1000 or more inhabitants and some areas of lower population, if they contain 250 or more dwellings of which at least 100 are occupied, are called cities. Now, if we take review of these representative definitions, we see that there are basically 7 bases which are used either singly or in combination to identify the urban function of the population. These are: number 1, specifically named settlements, specifically settlements designated urban by administrative status, a minimum population density, the proportion engaged in non-agricultural activities or occupations, a contiguity either to include a suburban area or to exclude an area of loosely scattered settlement, and finally the functional character. The above discussion clearly brings forward the thought that function or functional character of a settlement is of prime importance in the process of taxonomy, and this has become one of the guiding parameters or principles in the classification of urban places. Now, when we come to classification on the basis of age, now if we speak of age, what I have tried to do here is I have taken the classification on the 2 bases. One is age and the other is function. Now, why I have taken age as consideration is because cities are evolving. Cities have been evolving from small hamlet to megalopolis, which are today prominent in some of the countries of the world. Now, if age is not taken into consideration, we will not understand that what is the level of development of one particular urban city or an urban place. And function, as already stated, is of prime importance because functions define the character of an urban place. So, first we will discuss the classification of cities on the basis of age, where I start with Taylor's classification. Griffith Taylor in 1949 attempted to identify stages in the development of cities. On the basis of these stages, he classified cities into 6 categories: sub-infantile, the initial cluster in a single ill-defined street town. The second stage is the infantile stage. Here, the town which is in the second stage has no clear differentiation between industrial, commercial, or as to say residential area, though there is a tendency for the bigger houses to be located near the margins. There are no factories in this particular stage. The third stage is the juvenile stage, where there is a clear segregation of an extensive commercial quarter towards the center of the town, though separation of function is in no way complete. The residential area also show no clear differentiation. The fourth stage is called the adolescent stage, which shows clear differentiation of residential zone. The fifth stage is the early maturity. In this stage, there is differentiation of residential zone. The difference between the two lies only in the degree. The mature town is the one in which there are separate commercial area as well as the forezone of residential houses ranging from mansions to shacks. The classification is interesting from an academic point of view, but is unpractical as no specific determinants have been stated. Moreover, it is applicable only to the Western cities under a particular economic system. Now, we will come to the Mumford's classification. Mumford gave his classification in 1938. He was an American historian, sociologist, philosopher of technological and literary critique, suggesting 6 stages of development of cities. His work was influenced by the work of Scottish theorist Sir Patrick Geddes. His 6 stages of development of cities are Eopolis, number 1, the beginning of urbanization, of course, is rooted in the rural scene. Men used to be involved in hunting, and as they slowly learned, they became producers and settled in villages. They also indulged in fishing and mining. At this juncture of time, depending upon their religion, they set up a temple, cathedral, or a mosque. Subsequently, a market also came up. The second stage is called Polis. As more and more villages developed, many found that they have certain things common with their neighbors. So, as a result, the settlements slowly developed into a brotherhood of traders and became richer because of accumulation of wealth from nearby villages. The religious establishment extends further, and so does the market squares. There was a social stratification according to which people belonging to the higher hierarchy occupy central place while the others spread outwardly, such that the people of lower level took peripheral places. The third stage is called the Metropolis. These are the small towns and villages in region when they come together as a single entity. The entity, which is called a city, has compact site, good water and food supply, ample land. This becomes Metropolis, that is the mother of the city. As the city streamlines its production, surplus occurs. This surplus, characterized by the specialization of trades, results. Now, the fourth stage is called the Megalopolis. This is the stage which is marked with more diversity and cultures. There is migration from all round, people become indifferent, and there is also class struggle. Further developments are hence downwards. The city starts to decline or deteriorate. The fifth stage is called Tyrannopolis. The economic and social scene slowly metamorphose as more parasitic and becomes parasitic in nature. This stages of development of city is marked by complete indifference. People are mainly involved in pomp and pleasure. This is what happened towards the end of the Roman era. The environment of the city deteriorates and people flee towards the countryside. The commercial activities are marked by booms and slums. The final stage is called the Necropolis. Here the city decays further. The civilization follows a downward trend. War, famine, diseases erupt and lead the city towards destruction. The cultural institutions also erode greatly. Now, classification of urban places on the basis of functions. Now, urban centers are numerous and these vary in their functions, location, size, and in their social composition, culture, and also heritage. It is therefore meaningful to classify towns into categories for better understanding about their role in the regional and national context. There are several methods, ways, and means to classify urban centers. Site and situation of towns, population, size, and functions, their social and cultural environment are some of the criteria recognized to put them into different classes or groups. Out of all these bases of classification, the variable of function is widely accepted and reliable too. Reliable in the sense that urban place itself is defined as a unit characterized by non-agricultural activities. Non-agricultural activities here include administrative, industrial, commercial, cultural, etc. It is rare instance that an urban place is mono-activity center. Often towns develop diversified activities and are known to possess multifarious functions like economic, administrative, and cultural. Nearly all towns are supposed to provide various services like health, education, municipal services like water, electricity, sanitation, transportation, and marketing. In the following discussion, an attempt has been made to put forward various classifications adopted by different scholars all over the world on the basis of the functions of urban places. I start with Orosius's attempt. Orosius was the first one to provide the classification of towns on the basis of functions in 1921. He classified towns into 6 classes with 28 subtypes. The 6 classes were administrative, defense, culture, production towns, communication and recreation. This list is quite comprehensive and has sometimes been found useful. His classification, though, is a simple one, however, suffers from the defect of overgeneralization. Moreover, some of the classes are specific to a particular country at a particular time. To classify a town into one major category, the cutoff point of one class has to be decided by the arbitrary percentage, and therefore it is subjective. Economic activities too are neglected. These are important in the sense that a town also caters for the need of people residing outside the municipal boundaries. Various classes of functions, as suggested by the Orazio, create confusion in the sense that both functional and locational characteristics are mixed. For example, under communication class, group of towns performing function of transfer of goods are put. Towns with tidal limit, fall line towns, bridgehead towns point out attribute of location in performance of their function. It is thus doubtful that such towns are exclusively communicational and not locational. Similarly, pilgrimage centers are cultural towns, but these equally are significant in their geographical location on mountainous terrain, in valleys or on the banks of different rivers. In spite of all these critics, Orazio's classification marks a significant stage and provides a springboard for sophisticated methods. It is actually a comprehensive scheme bringing together polygonal functional urban activities to classify urban centers. The second classification is of Harris. Chauncey D. Harris remedied the deficiencies of the former subjective and judgmental classification provided by Orazio. In his paper, A Functional Classification of Cities in the United States, 1943, he was able to identify quantitatively dominant function out of multifunctional character of cities. He devised a scale of reference from a study of 984 towns population with more than 10,000 United States. The data was based on 1930 census. The census which was conducted in 1930. He used two sets of information. One was employment and the other was occupational figures reduced to percentages to indicate cut-off points for urban activities varying in importance. He identified 9 principal categories, starting from number 1, manufacturing, retailing, diversified, wholesaling, transportation, again mining, educational, resort or retirement, and others. Therefore, this is a condensed form of classification which was given. You can find the table which is provided in the text. But this classification also suffers from certain defects and is not universally viable, because the metropolitan districts have been used as functional units, and here industry group data has been used which was not available during that time. Consequently, number of cities which were too small to have metropolitan districts were left unclassified. Carter labeled Harris's classification as subjective because the decisions to access or delete with a minimum number or cutoff points seemed to be a personal one and were not due to some empirical standards. Under the class of transport and communication, workers engaged in telephone and telegraph services were omitted, which were nothing more than a subjective decision. Now we have the third classification given by Howard Nelson. He provided his classification and tried to remove the shortcomings which were present in the earlier classification. He used a procedure that could be objectively checked by other workers. His paper, A Service Classification of American Cities, was published in the journal Geography in 1955. He decided to base his method of classification entirely upon major industry groups as listed in the 1950 census of population for standard metropolitan areas, urbanized areas, and urban places of 10,000 or more population. He omitted the little significance groups like agriculture and construction, and finally arrived at 9 activity groups. These are manufacturing, retail, professional services, wholesale, personal services, public administration, transport and communication, finance, insurance, real estate and mining. The problem of city specialization and also the degree of specialization above the average was solved by giving margins of different degrees to different size classes. He did find a definite tendency for the percentages employed in some activities vary within the city, or rather with the city size. The question, when is the city specialized, was solved by using a statistical technique, and the standard deviation method was used. This method has been written in detail in the text, where you can refer to the table and the formula used by Nelson from the text. I will not discuss this here. You can see the table 2, which indicates the averages and the standard deviations in percentages for selected 9 activity groups as developed by Nelson in 1950. Now we come to the classification of cities as provided or as given for India. Now, why I have separated the classification given by different scholars for world as to the classification given for Indian cities is because the urbanization process in India has been very different from that of the Western world. Here the urban geographers have tried to see the characteristics in a different way. Here the characteristics as such, the only economic activities were not taken into consideration, rather cultural functions were also included in classification. You'll see, you'll understand what I'm trying to say when we proceed further. The urban geographers have applied a number of techniques to classify the urban places in India on the basis of the functions. Most of the classifications have utilized the occupational data provided by the Census of India. The first attempt was made by Amritlal in 1959. He used the location quotient method to determine the functional classification of class 1 cities of India. According to Lal, all the class 1 cities of India except a few are multifunctional in nature. Qazi Ahmed provided another classification in 1962, where he provided 62 variables to classify 102 types of cities on the basis of their functions. But the most important classification has been provided by Eopolis in 1971 and 1993, where he used 7 categories of workers as variables grouped into 3 major functional types, that is manufacturing, trade, transport and services. That means the 3 classification of towns, functional towns, and number one is manufacturing, the other one is trade and transport, and the third one is the service town. In India, the problem of classifying urban centers is not an easy task. This is because of several reasons. First, the number of towns in India is too large to handle on some viable grounds. The size of towns has a wide span ranging between 5,000 to 10 million. Secondly, the towns of India have a long historical background and have been under various regimes dating back 1,000 years from birth of Christ to the present era of democratic setup. And finally, the data about functions and economy of Indian cities have not yet been regularized or standardized because of the absence of suitable urban agency to deal with these. Under these circumstances, classifications and categorization of urban places in India differ from state to state and from author to author, rather even from time to time. The most common functional classification of the Indian cities is one, that is we call as administrative cities, the main function being the administration. Here we can cite examples like Delhi or all the capital cities which are of the state, that is the capital city of the country as well as that of the states or districts or other administrative divisional headquarters in the country. These administrative cities are legislative, executive and judiciary headquarters of that particular administrative units. New Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Bangalore, Lucknow, to name a few. Next we have defense towns. These are dominant. The dominant function is to pertain security and defense of the country. In fact, such towns are characterized with cantonments, barracks, military training centers, garrisons, air force bases, airfields, harbors, strategic locations, naval headquarters, etc. Here we have Ambala, Jalandhar, Jamnagar, Jodhpur, Khadagwasla, Pathankot, Vishakhapatnam, to name a few. Third, we have cultural cities. These cities perform either religious, educational or recreational functions. The cities of Allahabad, Amritsar, Bodh Gaya, Dharamshala, Gangotri, Haridwar, Nasik, Pushkar, Varanasi are the religious center in which the religious rituals are performed, and the markets are full of religious books and accessories required for the religious rituals. The educational cities like Aligarh, Kharagpur, Pantnagar, Shanti Niketan are some of the examples of educational cultural centers. The fourth are the collection centers. These are the mining towns, fishing ports, lumbering centers, and here we have examples like Zawar near Udaipur, Digpoi in Assam, Ankleshwar in Gujarat. These are basically from where we have different minerals which are being collected for maybe for further their production, or maybe even to export. So these are called collection centers, and in India we do have some cities which are examples of collection centers. Now these are very different from what we called as production centers. Production centers have manufacturing industries, and they are also called manufacturing cities. They are generally connected with the areas of raw material and markets where the manufactured goods can be sold. Thus, these cities are well connected by roads and railways. Examples are Bhilai, Bhadravati, Bokaro, Coimbatore, Dhanbad, Vijayawada, Vishakhapatnam. These are some of the most important manufacturing centers of the country. Sixth are the transport and distribution centers. The main functions performed here are trade and commerce and services. This category includes several categories of towns. The market towns are those which are basically market oriented, as they have wide range of goods, godowns, cold storages, wholesale markets. That means market is the most important. It is the most important commercial center. For example, we have Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Ahmedabad, to name a few. There can be other also, but here we just restrict to the market center. Seventh, we have the resorts. These are recreational centers because people here basically come for recreation. These towns may be based on health giving, like water springs. We have hot springs, we have seaside recreations, we have mountain climbing, we have sport facilities and national parks or tiger reserves or places of aesthetic beauty. Like examples can be Bageshwar, Dalhousie, Darjeeling, Dharamshala, Manali, Mount Abu, Nainital. All these cities or towns, whatever you say, are examples of resort towns. We also have residential towns. These are basically towns which have developed just to provide residential accommodation to the urban dwellers. In Delhi, Rohini, Indirapuram, Saraswati Vihar, Zakir Nagar are some of the pockets which have been specially developed as residential towns. Similarly, we have Panchkula near Chandigarh. These are essentially residential in nature. Similarly, residential towns are also found at the outskirts of Mumbai, Kolkata, Chennai, Bangalore, Hyderabad, Jaipur, etc. We have seaports. The main task here is to export and import goods. Haldia, Kandla, Kochi, Tuticorin, Okhla, Paradip are some which may be included in this category. And last but not the least are the cities with diversified function. As stated, most of the cities and towns in India are multifunctional. The capital cities are also the commercial, manufacturing, cultural, recreational centers. Some of them may even be educational centers. Similarly, seaports are engaged in trade and commerce besides cultural activities. Cities like Delhi, Mumbai, Kolkata, Vishakhapatnam, Jaipur, Allahabad are performing highly assorted functions. Over the period of time, number of cities have seen changes in their functional characteristics, or rather functional character. One has to keep in mind that these changes must be taken into consideration when one is attempting a functional classification. For example, some of the important cities of the past have disappeared as they lost their strategic, administrative, manufacturing or commercial importance. Now we deal with the Mitra's classification. Now this is one classification which is of paramount importance when we talk of functional classification in India, because First of all, the data which he used for his classification has been from census. So, the classification can even be attempted today while using the census data. Secondly, the basis which he has used is easily available. The data which has taken is of occupational occupations. He has taken the data of workers' participation in different activities as provided by census, which is available in each census. So, comparison can also be made and it is applicable to the entire country. Now, Ashok Mitra, a former Registrar General of the Census of India, attempted a comprehensive classification of all Indian cities. He grouped these 7 industrial categories of workers into 3 broad groups. Number 1, manufacturing. This town basically included the percentage of workers in class 3, 4, 5 and 6. That is, in all these categories, workers should be more than that in 7 and 8 or in 9. Trade and transport town, here the percentage of workers in 7 and 8 should be greater than that in 9 or in 3, 4 and 5, 6 put together. The third was a service town where the percentage of workers in class 9 should be more than the workers in 3, 4, 5, 6 together or 7 or 8 together. Degree of specialization in each of the 3 basic groups, that is ABC, that is manufacturing, trade and transport and service towns, was identified by a triangular method on a graph. The 3 sides of an equilateral triangle represent 3 groups by 100 values as shown in figure 1. The figure is given in the in the text which I have given, and the values have been plotted, and a point for each town within the triangle was perpendicular. Now the 3 circles form the center point, that is 33 1/3, and which was drawn proportional to represent 40, 45 and 50 values. These show increasingly tendency for specialization. The points within the first circle show highly diversified functions. Points between first and second circle are moderately diversified, while points between second and third represent specialization, that is predominant functions, and the points beyond, that is outside the third circle, show highly specialized predominant functions. Now, these classification of 2528 towns showed that there were as many as 736 towns which were agricultural. Then we have 1792 non-agricultural towns, 655 were manufacturing towns, 708 as trade and transport, and 420 as service town. Mitra's classification on the whole brings the major categories of cities with their specialization in distinguished 3 functional categories, that is manufacturing, number 1, trading, and number 3 is services. Majority of the towns show no clear specialization in one economic activity and have diversified economic base. The diversified cities with multiple functions constitutes the most common and representative type of cities. Now, if we see today's scenario, cities are mainly multifunctional. So, to attempt in classification of cities only on the base of functions is not a very sensible idea. But to actually see how the city is growing and diversifying, this classification becomes quite important for a student who is trying to understand the development or growth of cities in a country like India. Thank you.